The blizzard swallowed the world whole, turning everything beyond arm's reach into howling white chaos. And Callum Quinn knew with grim certainty that if he did not find shelter within the hour, the mountains would claim him as they had claimed so many others before. He trudged forward through snow that reached his knees, each step a battle against wind that seemed determined to push him back toward the cliff edge he had barely escaped an hour earlier. His fingers had gone numb inside his gloves, his face burned with cold, and ice had formed in his beard despite the scarf wrapped around his lower face. The supply run to the northern outpost had seemed simple enough 3 days ago when he had set out from his family's homestead. Get the winter medicines from the garrison, bring them back before the first real storm hit. Simple. Except the storm had come early, and with a fury that old-timers would talk about for years to come, assuming anyone survived to do the talking. Callum squinted against the driving snow, searching for any landmark, any hint of the trail he knew had to be somewhere nearby. His father had taught him these mountains, had shown him every path and shelter before the sickness took him 2 winters past. Callum had sworn then that he would keep the family safe, would keep the homestead running, would be the man his younger sisters and aging mother needed. Dying in a whiteout would break that promise in the most final way possible. A sound cut through the wind. Faint, almost lost in the storm's roar, but distinct enough to make him freeze mid-step. Crying, he turned his head, trying to locate the source. The wind played tricks in conditions like these, bouncing sounds off rock faces, making near seem far and far seem near. But there it was again, a sobbing that carried the edge of desperation, of someone who had been crying for a long time and no longer cared who heard. Every instinct screamed at him to keep moving, to find shelter, to save himself. He had perhaps 40 minutes before hypothermia made the decision for him. But the crying was that of a child, he was certain now, and no child deserved to die alone in this frozen hell. Callum changed direction, angling toward where he thought the sound originated. The wind fought him, shoving hard enough to make him stagger. Snow found every gap in his clothing, melting against skin only to freeze again in a layer of misery. He called out, his voice nearly stolen by the gale. "Hello, where are you?" The crying stuttered, went silent for a moment, then resumed with renewed urgency. Closer now. He pushed forward, forcing his legs to move through the deepening drifts. The world remained an impenetrable wall of white, but the sound drew him on like a rope through the darkness. His foot caught on something and he nearly fell, catching himself against what he realized was a boulder. No, not a boulder. The remains of a stone wall, half buried and crumbling, an old ruin of some kind. The mountains were full of them, remnants of settlements from before the wars, before the frontier had become the dangerous borderland it was today. "Keep crying," he shouted. "I am following your voice." The sobbing came from just ahead now, somewhere in the ruin. Callum felt his way along the wall, using it as a guide. His hand found a gap, an opening that might once have been a doorway. The crying was definitely coming from inside. He pushed through the opening and immediately felt the wind's fury lessen. Not much. The structure was too damaged to provide real shelter, but enough to make the difference between certain death and possible survival. Snow had drifted high in one corner, but portions of the roof still held, creating pockets of relative protection. In one such pocket, huddled against the far wall with her knees drawn to her chest, was a figure that made Callum's breath catch for reasons that had nothing to do with the cold. An orc child. A girl, he thought, though it was hard to tell through the layers of torn and inadequate clothing she wore. Green skin showed through rips in her sleeves, already taking on a grayish tinge from the cold. Her small tusks gleamed white as she gasped through her sobs, and her pointed ears were pressed flat against her head in misery and fear. She could not have been more than 7 or 8 years old. For a moment, they simply stared at each other. Everything Callum had ever been taught about orcs flickered through his mind. Dangerous, savage, the enemy. His grandfather had died fighting orc raiders. His uncle bore scars from a border skirmish. The garrison soldiers told stories of orc cruelty that made children huddle closer to the fire. But this was a child. A terrified, freezing child who was going to die if someone did not help her. The girl's golden eyes were huge in her small face, fixed on him with an expression that mixed hope and terror in equal measure. She tried to press herself further into the corner, but she was already as far back as she could go. Her lips trembled around her tusks, and fresh tears cut tracks through the grime on her cheeks. "Please," she whispered in heavily accented common, the word barely audible. "Please, no hurt." Something in Callum's chest twisted painfully. He slowly lowered himself to a crouch, trying to appear less threatening. The movement made his frozen muscles scream in protest. "I am not going to hurt you," he said, keeping his voice as gentle as he could while still being heard over the wind. "You are lost, yes." "In the storm," the girl nodded, a jerky movement that sent more tears spilling down. "Lost, cold, so cold. I know, I am cold too." Callum looked around the ruin, assessing. The spot where the girl huddled was probably the best shelter available, where 2 walls met, and a portion of roof created something like a corner. Snow had already drifted against the outer wall, which would actually help with insulation if they could pile more up. "We need to get warm. Do you understand? We need to work together or we will both freeze." The girl hesitated, her whole body trembling. From cold or fear, Callum could not tell, probably both. "I am Callum," he said, touching his chest. "What is your name?" Grukka, she stammered. "Grukka, that is a good name." He carefully shrugged off his pack, every movement deliberate and slow to avoid startling her. "I have a blanket, and flint to maybe make fire if we can find anything dry enough to burn. But I need you to trust me a little bit. Can you do that?" Grukka watched him with those huge golden eyes, searching his face for something. Whatever she found must have satisfied her because she gave another small nod. "Good girl. Now, this building is not good shelter, but it is better than being outside. We are going to make it better. First, I need to block that doorway with snow. It will help keep the wind out." He pointed to the opening he had entered through. "You stay right there and try to stay calm. Can you do that?" "Yes," Grukka whispered. Callum forced his protesting body back to the entrance and began scooping snow, packing it into the opening. His hands screamed in agony as he worked, the cold biting deeper. But he kept at it, building a crude wall that rose from the ground up. He left a small gap at the top for air, remembering his father's warnings about sealed spaces and suffocating in the night, then packed more snow around the edges. When he turned back, Grukka had not moved, but she was watching him work with an intensity that suggested she was memorizing every action. "There. That will help." Callum returned to the corner and dug through his pack with clumsy fingers. The blanket was there, tightly rolled and blessedly dry. He also found the small leather pouch that held his fire-starting kit, and at the bottom, wrapped in waxed cloth, 2 strips of dried meat and a hard biscuit. Not much, but it was something. He spread the blanket out, then looked at Grukka. She had drawn up again at his approach, wariness returning. "The blanket is big enough for both of us," he said. "And we need to share heat. I know you are scared, but you have to trust me now, Grukka. Just for tonight. In the morning, the storm will pass and we can figure out where we are. But right now, we have to stay alive. Do you understand?" Grukka's lower lip trembled. A fresh tear rolled down her cheek. but she nodded and slowly, so slowly, began to uncurl from her defensive ball. Callum held out his hand. After a long moment, Grukka reached out and placed her small green hand in his larger one. Her skin was cold as ice. "You are freezing," he said, alarmed. He pulled her closer, wrapping the blanket around both of them and positioning them so their backs were to the corner walls. "We need to warm you up. Come here." He pulled her against his side, tucking her under his arm. She was stiff at first, every muscle tight with fear, but gradually she began to relax into the warmth of his body. Callum wrapped the blanket tighter around them both, creating a cocoon. "There." "Better, better," Grukka agreed, her voice muffled against his coat. The shivering that racked her small frame began to ease slightly. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the storm rage outside their inadequate shelter. Callum knew they were not out of danger yet. The night would be long and brutally cold, even with the precautions he had taken. But they had a chance now, a small one but better than either of them had possessed alone. "Grukka," he said quietly, "how did you get lost out here? Where is your clan?" The girl was quiet for so long he thought she might not answer. Then in a small voice she said, "They left me." "Left you? What do you mean?" "I am weak." The words came out flat, toneless. "Small, not strong like orcs should be. My mother said I am burden. They left me on the mountain. Said if I am worthy, the spirits will guide me home. If not—" She trailed off with a shrug that tried to be casual but failed entirely. Callum felt fury kindle in his chest, hot enough to momentarily banish the cold. "They left a child alone on the mountain. In a storm." "Storm came after. They left me yesterday, before dawn. I tried to follow, but I could not find the trail. Then the storm came and I was lost." Grukka's voice cracked. "I walked and walked, so cold. I found this place and I stopped because I could not walk more. I thought I would die. I cried because I did not want to die alone." The casual cruelty of it staggered him. He had heard stories of orc customs, of their harsh ways, but he had assumed they were exaggerations meant to justify the wars. To think that anyone could abandon a child, their own child, to the elements simply for being small or weak made him sick. "You are not going to die," he said firmly. "I found you and I am not leaving you. We are going to survive this night and tomorrow we will figure out what comes next. I promise you that." Grukka tilted her head back to look up at him, confusion clear in her expression. "Why, you are human." "I am orc. We are enemies. You are a child. That matters more than anything else. But your people and my people hate each other. Maybe, probably. But you have done nothing to me, and I am not going to let you freeze because of things other people did." Callum adjusted the blanket, tucking it more securely around her shoulders. "Besides, you are helping keep me warm too. We are helping each other. That makes us not enemies, I think." Grukka considered this with the seriousness only children can bring to philosophical questions. Finally, she nodded. "Not enemies," she agreed. Then, after a pause, "Friends?" "Yes," Callum said, surprised by how much he meant it. "Friends." A tiny smile crossed Grukka's face, the first he had seen from her. It transformed her features, making her look even younger. She snuggled closer, seeking warmth, and Callum tightened his arm around her. "Are you hungry?" he asked. "Very hungry." He fished out the dried meat and biscuit, breaking both into pieces. "Here, not much, but it will help." Grukka took the food with both hands, staring at it as if she could not quite believe it was real. Then she attacked it with the focused intensity of someone who had not eaten in far too long. Callum ate his own share more slowly, making it last, and tried to ignore how the small amount of food only seemed to emphasize how empty his stomach was. When the food was gone, Grukka licked her fingers clean and then, to Callum's surprise, curled up against him like a puppy seeking warmth. Within minutes, her breathing had evened out into the rhythm of sleep. Callum sat in the darkness, listening to the storm and the child's breathing, and wondered what in the world he was going to do come morning. Taking an orc child back to his homestead would cause problems. His mother would probably understand. She had always been more practical than prejudiced, but his sisters might not. And the neighbors would certainly have opinions. The garrison soldiers would be even worse. But he could not just leave her. The thought was unacceptable. Whatever happened, he would figure it out. His father had taught him that decent people help those in need, regardless of who or what they were. The specifics of orcish heritage did not change the fundamental truth that Grukka was a child who needed help. He would take her home, keep her safe and warm and fed. And if people had problems with that, well, they could take it up with him directly. The decision made, Callum allowed himself to relax slightly. The blanket was doing its job, trapping their combined body heat. He was still cold, would be cold all night, but it was survivable cold now. His eyelids grew heavy. He tried to fight it, knowing that sleeping in this cold was dangerous, but exhaustion and the day's exertions were pulling him down. Just before he slipped into sleep, he felt Grukka's hand clutch the front of his coat, her small green fingers tangling in the fabric. Even in sleep, she held on tight, as if afraid he might disappear if she let go. Callum's last conscious thought was a renewed promise. He would not disappear. He would not leave her. Whatever came next, they would face it together. When Callum woke, gray pre-dawn light was seeping through the gaps in their crude shelter. The storm had passed, leaving behind the profound silence that follows heavy snow. Every part of his body ached, stiff from cold and the awkward position he had slept in. But he was alive, and the warm weight against his side confirmed that Grukka was alive as well. He looked down at the sleeping orc child. She was still clutching his coat, her face pressed against his side. In sleep, she looked peaceful, the fear and desperation gone from her features. He hated to wake her, but they needed to move. The temperature would rise with the sun, but not by much, and they had a long journey ahead. "Grukka," he said softly, gently shaking her shoulder. "Time to wake up. The storm is over." Golden eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. Then memory returned and fear flickered across her face before she looked up and saw him. Relief replaced the fear and she smiled tentatively. "You stayed," she said. "I told you I would not leave. I keep my promises." Callum carefully extracted himself from the blanket and immediately regretted it as the cold hit him. He forced himself to stand, his joints protesting. "We need to get moving. I need to figure out where we are and get us home." "Home?" Grukka scrambled to her feet, still wrapped in the blanket. "Your home. You are taking me to human home." "Yes, unless you have somewhere else you would rather go." She shook her head quickly. "No, nowhere else. But will they let me stay? Will they not be angry that you brought orc? Let me worry about that." "Come on. Help me take down this snow wall so we can see where we are." Together they dismantled Callum's crude barrier, pushing the snow back out through the doorway. When enough was cleared for him to squeeze through, Callum stepped outside and surveyed their surroundings. The world had been transformed. Snow lay thick and pristine in all directions, smoothing out the landscape into rolling white hills. But the storm had cleared completely, and in the growing light, Callum could see the distinctive profile of Twin Peak Mountain to the east. Relief washed through him. He knew where they were. "We are about 8 miles from my homestead," he called back to Grukka. "It will take most of the day in this snow, but we can make it." Grukka appeared in the doorway, still wrapped in his blanket. She blinked at the snow, then looked up at him. 8 miles is very far." "It is, but we do not have another choice. Can you walk it?" She straightened, a flash of pride crossing her young face. "I can walk. I am strong enough." "I know you are. You survived a night in the storm. That takes real strength." Callum shouldered his pack and folded the blanket, tucking it away. "Stay close to me. The snow is deep and there might be places where it hides holes or drops. I will go first and make a trail. You follow in my footsteps. Understand?" "I understand." They set off into the pristine morning, Callum breaking trail and Grukka following close behind. The going was slow and exhausting. The snow came up to Callum's thighs in places, and he had to lift each leg high to make progress. Behind him, Grukka struggled even more, her shorter legs forcing her to sometimes jump from footprint to footprint. After an hour, Callum called a halt. They were both breathing hard, their breath pluming in the frigid air. "Rest for a moment," he said, and Grukka immediately sat down in the snow, her face flushed with exertion. "This is hard," she admitted. "Very hard, but you are doing great." Callum studied her, noticing how inadequate her clothing was. Her feet were wrapped in what looked like leather scraps, already soaked through. "Your feet must be freezing." "They are cold," she said, trying to sound brave, "but I can keep walking." Callum made a decision. He sat down and pulled off his own boots, then removed the thick wool socks he wore underneath. "Here, put these on over your wrappings, they will help." "But then your feet will be cold," Grukka protested. "I have boots. You do not. Take them." Reluctantly, Grukka accepted the socks and pulled them on. They came up past her knees on her smaller frame, and she had to wrap the excess around several times, but they would provide much-needed insulation. Callum pulled his boots back on over his bare feet and tried not to think about how cold they were going to get. They continued on. The sun rose higher, bringing a little warmth but not enough to make much difference. The landscape was beautiful in its winter severity, but Callum had no attention to spare for aesthetics. All his focus was on putting one foot in front of the other, on maintaining their direction, on making sure Grukka kept up. Around midday, they stopped again to rest. Callum found a fallen log that was mostly clear of snow and brushed it off so they could sit. Grukka collapsed beside him, panting hard. "How much further?" she asked. "About halfway. We are making good time." It was a lie. They were going slower than he had hoped. At this rate, they might not make it before dark, and another night in the open, even without a storm, could be fatal. But he kept the worry from his voice. "You are very strong, Grukka. Many children would have given up by now." She looked up at him, those golden eyes searching his face. "You are kind. Why are you kind to me?" "Because you need help and I can give it. That is what decent people do. My clan says humans are cruel, that they kill orcs for fun, that they cannot be trusted." "And humans say the same about orcs," Callum replied. "But I think maybe both sides are wrong, or at least not completely right. There are cruel humans, yes, and I imagine there are cruel orcs too, but there are also kind ones. We just have to choose to be kind." Grukka thought about this, her face serious. "I will choose to be kind then, like you." "That is a good choice." Callum stood and offered her his hand. Ready to keep going, she took his hand and let him pull her to her feet, her small green fingers wrapped around his, trusting now in a way they had not been the night before. Ready. The afternoon wore on. Callum's feet had gone numb in his boots, which was probably a mercy. His legs burned with fatigue and his back ached from the pack. Behind him, he could hear Grukka's breathing becoming more labored, but she did not complain. She just kept walking, kept following his trail, her determination a humbling thing to witness. Finally, as the sun was beginning to descend toward the western peaks, Callum crested a small rise and saw, in the valley below, the welcome sight of his family's homestead. Smoke rose from the chimney, a sign that his mother and sisters were alive and well. The barn stood solid and reassuring, the fields stretched out smooth under their blanket of snow, and the small house with its stone walls and thick thatch roof looked like the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "There," he said, pointing. "That is home." Grukka stopped beside him, staring down at the homestead. "It is pretty," she said quietly. Then, with a note of anxiety, "Will they be angry when they see me? They might be surprised. But my mother is a good woman, and my sisters will follow her lead. Do not worry. I will not let anyone hurt you." They made their way down the slope toward the homestead. As they got closer, the door of the house flew open and two figures emerged, followed a moment later by a third. Callum recognized his sisters, Marilla and Joanna, and his mother, Clara. "Callum." His mother's voice carried across the snow. "Thank the gods. We thought you were lost in the storm." They rushed forward, then stopped abruptly as they noticed Grukka. Callum felt the child's hand tighten on his coat, clutching the fabric. Clara Quinn was a practical woman who had raised 3 children on a frontier homestead after her husband's death. She had dealt with harsh winters, crop failures, raids, and illness without losing her head. But the sight of her son returning from a deadly storm with an orc child clearly tested even her considerable composure. "Callum," she said carefully. "Who is this?" "This is Grukka. I found her lost in the storm last night. She was crying and freezing, and I could not leave her." He placed his hand on Grukka's shoulder, feeling her trembling. "She needs food and warmth and somewhere safe to stay. I brought her home." Marilla, who was 16 and thought herself quite grown up, stared with wide eyes. Joanna, only 12, looked fascinated and frightened in equal measure. "She is an orc," Marilla said unnecessarily. "I am aware. She is also a child who was abandoned by her clan and left to die on the mountain. Are we the sort of people who would turn away a child in need?" Callum kept his voice firm but respectful. This was his mother's house, and he would not challenge her authority in front of his sisters, but he would not back down either. Clara looked at Grukka for a long moment. The little orc girl stared back, fear and hope warring in her expression. Then Clara's face softened in the way it always did when confronted with something small and helpless, and Callum knew they would be all right. "Of course we are not those sort of people," Clara said. "Come inside, both of you. You look half frozen. And you, child, what is your name?" "Grukka," the girl whispered. "Grukka." "Well, Grukka, welcome to our home. Let us get you warm and fed. You look like you could use both." Clara turned and headed back toward the house, and after a moment, Marilla and Joanna followed. Callum felt Grukka's grip on his coat loosen slightly. He looked down at her and smiled. "See, I told you it would be all right. Your mother is kind. Like you, she is. Come on, let us get inside." The interior of the house was wonderfully warm after the bitter cold outside. A fire burned in the large hearth that dominated one wall, and the smell of stew filled the air. It was a simple space, just 2 rooms, but it was clean and comfortable, and most importantly, it was warm. Clara immediately busied herself preparing food while Marilla filled a basin with water to warm Grukka's hands and feet. Joanna hovered nearby, curiosity overcoming her initial fear. "You are very green," she observed to Grukka. "Joanna," Clara scolded. "Manners." "It is all right," Grukka said quietly. "I am green. All orcs are green." "I think it is pretty," Joanna decided. "Like leaves in summer." Grukka smiled at that, a real smile that showed her small tusks. Joanna smiled back. Callum sank into a chair near the fire, exhaustion hitting him now that they were safe. His mother appeared at his elbow with a cup of hot broth. "Drink this. You look ready to fall over." She studied his face. "That was a foolish, dangerous, incredibly brave thing you did, bringing her back through that snow." "I could not leave her, Mother. I know, you are your father's son." She touched his shoulder gently. "He would be proud of you. I am proud of you." Over the next hour, the homestead returned to a semblance of normalcy. Callum and Grukka were fed, warmed, and made comfortable. Grukka ate with the focus of someone who had been hungry for far too long, and Clara kept refilling her bowl until the girl finally indicated she could hold no more. When everyone had eaten, Clara pulled Callum aside while his sisters entertained Grukka by showing her a small carved horse that had been their father's. "We need to talk about this," Clara said quietly. "Not that I disagree with what you did, but we need to think practically. An orc child living here will cause talk, the neighbors will notice, and if word reaches the garrison—" "I know, but I am not sending her away. She has nowhere to go, Mother. Her own clan abandoned her." "What kind of people would do that to a child?" Clara's voice was tight with disapproval. "The kind who value strength above all else, apparently. She is small for her age, and they considered her a burden." Callum watched Grukka laughing at something Joanna had said, the sound bright and happy, so different from the desperate crying he had followed through the storm. "She deserves better than that, she does, and she will have it here for as long as she needs." Clara's voice was firm. "But Callum, you need to be prepared for difficulties. People will not understand, they will say cruel things. Some may even try to take her away, claiming it is not safe to harbor an orc. Let them try. This is our land, our home, and I am not a child anymore, Mother. I am the man of this household, and I say she stays." Clara smiled, sad and proud at once. "Yes, you are the man of this household now." "Very well. We will face whatever comes together as a family, all of us." She looked at Grukka, including her. The days that followed fell into a new rhythm. Winter had truly arrived with the storm, and snow lay thick across the valley. The daily tasks of survival, feeding animals, gathering firewood, cooking, mending took on increased urgency in the cold. Callum found himself busier than ever, and Grukka, to everyone's surprise, proved eager to help. She was still small and sometimes weak, but what she lacked in size she made up for in determination. She learned to gather eggs from the chickens, to help Joanna prepare vegetables for cooking, to sweep the floor and tend the fire. She followed Callum around like a shadow when he did outdoor chores, watching everything he did with intense focus. "Why do you put the extra hay there?" she asked one morning as he worked in the barn. "Because the cows will eat it during the day, and it also helps insulate the walls. Keeps them warmer." "Oh, that is clever." She immediately began copying his actions, her small hands grabbing armfuls of hay and stuffing them along the walls. Callum watched her work and felt a strange warmth in his chest. She was a good child, eager to please and quick to learn. And despite everything she had been through, she maintained a fundamental optimism that he found remarkable. Not everything was easy, of course. Grukka had nightmares most nights, waking with muffled cries that brought Callum downstairs from the loft where he slept. He would find her curled up in the corner near the hearth where Clara had made her a bed, shaking and crying. The first few times, she had been terrified when he approached, as if expecting punishment for disturbing the household. "It is all right," he had told her that first night, kneeling beside her pallet. "You just had a bad dream. You are safe here." "I am sorry," she had whispered. "I did not mean to wake you. You have nothing to apologize for. Everyone has nightmares sometimes. Do you want to talk about it?" She had shaken her head, but she had also reached out and clutched his hand, holding on tight. He had sat with her until she fell back asleep, and had done the same every night since when the nightmares came. As the first week passed, then the second, the reality of their situation began to settle in. Grukka was not a temporary visitor. She was part of their household now, and that meant planning for her future. "She needs proper clothes," Clara announced one evening as they all sat around the fire. "Those rags she arrived in are falling apart, and she cannot keep wearing Joanna's cast-offs. They do not fit her right." "I do not mind," Grukka said quickly. The clothes are warm. I am grateful for them. You should have clothes that fit properly, Clara said firmly. And boots. Real boots, not those scraps of leather. Callum, when you go to town for supplies next week, take measurements. We will order what she needs. Callum nodded, but he felt a flutter of worry. Going to town meant facing the neighbors, meant dealing with questions about the orc child he had taken in. Word had already spread, of course. In a small frontier community, there were no secrets. The neighboring homesteads had noticed smoke from their chimney, had seen Callum doing chores, and the lack of visitors told its own story about what people thought of his decision. The trip to town came on a bright, cold morning 2 weeks after Callum had found Grukka. He hitched up their old draft horse to the small sledge they used for winter transport and loaded the few items they had to trade: eggs, a wheel of cheese his mother had made, some carved wooden implements his father had crafted years ago that they could finally bear to part with. "Can I come?" Grukka asked, appearing at his elbow as he worked. "No, better you stay here where it is safe. But I want to see the town. I have never been to a human town. Grukka." He paused, trying to find the right words. "The people in town are not all like my family. Some of them will not be kind to you. I do not want you to be hurt by that." Her face fell, but she nodded, understanding. "Because I am orc. Because they are ignorant. But yes, because you are orc and they have been taught to fear orcs. It is not right, but it is true. When will it change? When will they see I am not scary? I do not know. Maybe never, maybe eventually. But for now, you are safer here." He touched her shoulder gently. "Help my mother today. I will be back before dark." The ride to town took 3 hours through the snow-packed trails. The settlement of Millbrook Gap was not large. Perhaps 50 buildings clustered around a central square where the weekly market was held. The garrison outpost stood on the north end, a reminder of the constant threat of raids from both orc clans and bandits that plagued the frontier. Callum guided the sledge to the general store and tied up the horse. As he unloaded his trade goods, he could feel eyes on him. Conversations stopped as he passed. People stared. Inside the store, the merchant, Thomas Quaid, greeted him with reserved politeness. "Callum, heard you made it back through that storm. That was some weather." "It was. I am lucky to be alive." Callum set his goods on the counter. "I need to trade for some supplies, and I need to order some clothes made for a child." "Your sister?" Thomas asked, though his tone suggested he knew better. "No, for someone staying with us." "The orc," Thomas said it flatly. "Word is you brought an orc youngling back with you. That true?" "It is true. She was lost and freezing. I found her and brought her home. And you kept her." "I did. She is a child who needed help. I provided it." Callum met the merchant's eyes steadily. "Is that going to be a problem?" Thomas was quiet for a moment, then shrugged. "Your business who you keep in your house. But you should know people are talking. Some are mighty concerned about having an orc living so close, saying it is not safe. She is 8 years old and weighs maybe 50 pounds. I think people can restrain their fear." "It is not fear of her. It is what she represents. Orcs and humans do not mix, Callum. That is just how it is. And having one living among us, even a child, it sets a precedent that makes folks nervous." "Then folks will have to be nervous. I am not turning her out. Now, can we do business or not?" Thomas sighed. "We can do business. What do you need?" Callum listed his requirements, including the measurements for Grukka's clothes. Thomas noted everything down without comment, then tallied up the trade value and what Callum would need to pay in coin for the difference. As Callum was finishing up, the door opened and 3 garrison soldiers entered. They wore the blue and gray uniform of the frontier forces, and their leader, a sergeant named Marcus Quinn, a distant cousin Callum had always disliked, looked him over with obvious disdain. "Well, if it is not the orc lover," Marcus said. his voice carrying through the store. "Heard you took in one of the savages, Callum. That true? It is true. Not that it is any of your concern. It is my concern when there is an orc living free in my jurisdiction. That is a security risk. She is a child, not a warrior, not a threat, just a lost little girl who needed help." "She is an orc," Marcus said, as if that explained everything. "Orcs are the enemy. In case you forgot, they killed your grandfather, or does that not matter anymore? My grandfather died in a war. This child had nothing to do with that war. She was not even born yet." Callum forced himself to remain calm, though anger was building in his chest. "And she is staying with my family. We are not asking permission. You might want to reconsider that. Could be I will need to come out and inspect your homestead. Make sure everything is safe and legal." "We have broken no laws. You have no cause to harass my family." "Yet," Marcus said. He smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "Things happen on the frontier, Callum. Accidents, misunderstandings. You should think real careful about whether harboring an orc is worth the trouble it might bring." "Are you threatening my family, Marcus?" "Just giving you some friendly advice, cousin. That is all." Marcus gestured to his men and they left, the door slamming behind them. In the silence that followed, Thomas cleared his throat. "He means it, you know. Marcus has always been hard about orcs, lost his father to them, same as you lost your grandfather. He will make trouble for you if he can. Let him try." Callum gathered his purchases. "How long for the clothes?" 2 weeks, maybe 3. I will send word when they arrive." Callum loaded up the sledge and started the long ride home, his mood dark. He had known there would be resistance to Grukka staying with them, but Marcus's thinly veiled threats were more serious than he had anticipated. The garrison held significant power on the frontier, and a sergeant with a grudge could make life very difficult. When he arrived home, night was falling. He found his family and Grukka gathered around the fire, and the moment he entered, Grukka ran to him. "You are back. I helped make dinner." "I peeled all the potatoes, did you? That is wonderful." He tried to inject warmth into his voice, pushing aside the worry from town. "It smells delicious." But Clara had known him his whole life, and she could read his face. After dinner, when the girls were occupied, she pulled him aside. "What happened in town?" He told her about Marcus, about the threats and the general hostility. Clara's face grew tight with worry. "That man has always been a bully, but he has power now, and that makes him dangerous." She glanced toward where Grukka sat with his sisters, all 3 girls playing some sort of game with stones. "Maybe we should think about other options, for her safety." "What other options? Where would she go? Back to the clan that abandoned her. That is a death sentence. Into the wilderness alone." "Same result. There are no other options, Mother. This is her home now, and we will defend it. Even if it means trouble with the garrison, even then," Clara sighed. "You have your father's stubborn streak and his good heart. I hope that is enough." The winter deepened. Snow piled high against the walls, and ice formed in intricate patterns on the windows. The world contracted to the small circle of warmth around the homestead, the daily struggle to stay fed and sheltered consuming most of their energy. But within that struggle, something unexpected bloomed. Grukka became part of the family in ways that went beyond mere tolerance. Joanna adored her, following her around and insisting on teaching her letters and numbers. Marilla, initially skeptical, found herself won over by Grukka's earnest desire to help and learn. Clara treated her exactly as she treated her own daughters, with firm kindness and genuine affection. And Callum found himself growing attached to the small green-skinned girl in ways that surprised him. She was smart and funny, brave and kind, and she brought a light to the household that had been missing since his father died. When she laughed, which happened more and more frequently as winter wore on, It was a sound of pure joy that made everyone smile. One evening, as Callum was teaching Grukka how to carve wood by the firelight, she looked up at him with those golden eyes and said, "Callum, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "What is it?" "Why did you really save me? In the storm. You could have died looking for me." He considered the question carefully, wanting to give her an honest answer. "Because I heard you crying and I could not walk away. Because I believed then, and I believe now, that every life has value. Yours included. Maybe especially yours because you were so young and scared and alone. I could not let you die like that, even though I am orc. That does not matter. Not to me. What matters is that you are a person, Grukka. You think and feel and hope and dream just like anyone else. The color of your skin and the shape of your ears do not change that." Grukka was quiet for a long moment, her small hand still on the piece of wood she had been shaping. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "My clan said I was worthless, that I was weak and would never be a true orc. They said no one would ever value me. They were wrong. You have value, you have worth, and you are not weak, Grukka. You are one of the strongest people I know." She looked up at him, tears shining in her eyes. "Do you really think so? I know so. You survived being abandoned. You survived that storm. You adapted to living with humans, even though you were scared and had every reason not to trust us. That takes incredible strength." A tear rolled down her green cheek, then another, but she was smiling. "Thank you, Callum, for everything, for saving me, for keeping me. For making me part of your family. I will never forget it. Never. You do not need to thank me. You are family now. That means we take care of each other." She launched herself at him, wrapping her small arms around his neck in a fierce hug. Callum hugged her back, and over her shoulder he saw his mother watching with tears in her own eyes. The peace lasted until early spring, when the snow began to melt and the world started to wake from winter sleep. Callum was in the barn, mucking stalls, when he heard horses approaching. Several horses, moving fast. He dropped his pitchfork and hurried outside. A group of riders was coming up the path to the homestead, 6 men in garrison uniforms led by Marcus. Callum's heart sank. He had hoped that the issue might simply fade away, that Marcus would find other things to occupy his attention. Clearly, that hope had been foolish. He walked out to meet them, positioning himself between the riders and the house. Behind him, he heard the door open. His mother and sisters emerged, with Grukka peering out from behind them. Marcus reined in his horse and looked down at Callum with an expression of smug satisfaction. "Callum Quinn, we are here on official garrison business." "What business?" "There have been reports of orc activity in the area. Raids on homesteads, livestock stolen, signs of scouts. We are checking all properties, making sure everyone is secure." Marcus's gaze slid past Callum to where Grukka stood, and making note of any orc presence in the region. "There have been no raids near here. And the only orc present is a child under my family's protection. So you admit to harboring an orc?" Marcus gestured to one of his men, who produced a piece of paper. "We are authorized to question any orc found within garrison jurisdiction. That includes your little pet there." "She is not a pet. She is a child, and you are not questioning her. You have no authority to harass a resident of this homestead." "Actually, I do. Garrison law is very clear on this point. All orcs are subject to military authority in frontier zones." "That means I can take her in for questioning whenever I deem it necessary." Marcus smiled. "And I deem it necessary now. You will not touch her." Callum's voice was flat and hard. "She stays here with my family where she is safe. You want to obstruct garrison business, Callum. That is a crime. I could have you arrested. Then arrest me, but you are not taking her." The 2 men stared at each other, tension crackling in the air. The other soldiers shifted uneasily, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Finally, one of them, a younger man Callum vaguely recognized, spoke up. "Sergeant, maybe we should just move on. The child does not look like a threat, and these are good people. Everyone knows the Quinns. I will decide what is a threat, soldier." Marcus did not take his eyes off Callum. "But you know what? You are right. The child is not the real problem here. The problem is the example being set. Humans and orcs living together like it is natural, like it is acceptable. That kind of thinking spreads, and before you know it, people start questioning why we are even fighting the orc clans at all." "Maybe that is a question worth asking," Callum said quietly. "Maybe there are ways to have peace instead of constant war. Peace with orcs. They are savages. Monsters. You of all people should know that, Callum. They killed your grandfather. And we have killed plenty of orcs. At what point does the cycle end? When do we say enough death, enough hatred, let us try something different? It ends when we win. When the orc threat is eliminated and the frontier is finally safe for civilized folk." Marcus gathered his reins. "I am giving you a warning, cousin, out of respect for family. Send that creature away. Back to the wilds where it belongs. If you keep it here, there will be consequences." "Is that a threat?" "It is a promise. Accidents happen on the frontier, Callum. Houses burn, animals go missing. Sometimes people get hurt." Marcus turned his horse. "You have 1 week to do the right thing. After that, I cannot guarantee your family's safety." The soldiers rode away, leaving Callum standing in the yard with his fists clenched and his heart pounding. He heard footsteps behind him and turned to find his mother there, her face pale. "He meant it," she said. "He will hurt us if we do not comply. Let him try. I am not giving up Grukka. Not to him, not to anyone. Callum, we have to think practically. If the garrison turns against us, then we will deal with it. But I will not abandon that child. I will not." He looked past his mother to where Grukka stood in the doorway, her face stricken. "She is family." That night, Callum lay in his loft, staring at the ceiling and trying to figure out what to do. Marcus was serious about his threats, that much was clear, and the garrison sergeant had the power to make good on them. But the thought of sending Grukka away, of telling her she had to leave the only home where she had been safe and loved, was unbearable. He must have eventually fallen asleep, because he woke to the sound of the door creaking open downstairs. In the darkness, he heard soft footsteps, then the scrape of the bar being lifted from the door. Callum sat up, instantly alert. He climbed down from the loft as quietly as he could and reached the main room just in time to see Grukka slipping out the front door into the night. He grabbed his coat and boots and followed her. Outside, the moon was bright, illuminating the world in silver light. Grukka was walking away from the house, toward the forest edge, her small figure dark against the snow. "Grukka," he called, keeping his voice low to avoid waking his mother and sisters. "Where are you going?" She stopped but did not turn around. Her shoulders were shaking. Callum hurried to her, catching up in a few long strides. When he reached her, he saw tears streaming down her face. "I am leaving," she said, her voice breaking. "I have to leave. That man, he will hurt your family because of me. I cannot let that happen. You have been too kind to me. I will not let you suffer for it." "Grukka, no, you are not leaving." "I have to. Did you not hear him? He will burn your house. He will hurt your mother and sisters, all because you saved me." She wiped furiously at her tears. "I am not worth that. I am not worth anyone getting hurt. You are worth it. You are worth everything." Callum knelt in the snow, bringing himself to her eye level. "Listen to me. You are not leaving. We are going to face this together as a family, all of us. But he will hurt you, maybe, or maybe he is just making threats to scare us. Either way, we do not bow to bullies. My father taught me that. You stand up for what is right, even when it is hard, even when it is dangerous." and keeping you safe is right. Why? Grukka's voice was anguished. Why do you care so much? I am just an orc. I am nobody. You are not nobody. You are Grukka. You are smart and brave and kind. You make my sisters laugh. You help my mother in the kitchen. You are learning to read and carve and tend animals. You are part of our family, and family does not abandon family. Not ever. You're family. But I am not really family. I am different. So what? Family is not just about blood or what you look like. It is about who you choose to stand beside, who you choose to love, and we choose you, Grukka, all of us. He took her small hands in his. So please come back inside. Let us figure this out together. She stared at him for a long moment, tears still flowing. Then she nodded, a tiny movement, and let him lead her back to the house. Inside, they found Clara waiting by the fire, wrapped in her shawl. She had clearly heard everything. That child was going to sacrifice herself to protect us, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Callum, we cannot let harm come to her. We just cannot. We will not. But I do not know how to stop Marcus if he is determined to cause trouble. Then we need help, allies. We cannot face the garrison alone. Clara stood, decision clear in her posture. In the morning, I will ride to the neighboring homesteads. The Millbrook Gap community has always looked after its own. If we can convince enough people that Grukka is not a threat, that she is just a child who deserves protection, maybe we can build enough support that Marcus will back down. And if we cannot, then we fight. However we have to. She looked at Grukka, who was still crying silently. Come here, child. Grukka went to her, and Clara wrapped her in a fierce hug. You are my daughter now in all the ways that matter, and I protect my daughters, all of them. The next days were a flurry of activity. Clara made good on her promise, visiting every homestead within a day's ride and explaining the situation. Some people were sympathetic, others were not. But slowly, a coalition began to form. Families who remembered Callum's father and the help he had given them over the years. People who believed in doing right by children, regardless of their heritage. Neighbors who were frankly tired of Marcus's bullying and saw this as an opportunity to push back. On the 6th day after Marcus's visit, a meeting was called at the general store. Nearly 50 people showed up, cramming into the small space. Callum stood at the front with Grukka beside him, his mother and sisters just behind them. Thomas, the merchant, acted as moderator. All right, everyone knows why we are here. Marcus wants the Quinn family to send away the orc child they have taken in. Says she is a security threat. But the Quinns say she is just a lost youngling who needed help. We are here to decide where the community stands on this. Marcus was there too, along with several soldiers. He spoke first, making his case. The law is clear. Orcs are the enemy. We do not harbor enemies during wartime. That child might seem harmless now, but she will grow up. She will become strong, and her loyalty will always be to her own kind, not to us. Letting her stay sets a dangerous precedent. Then Callum spoke. Grukka was abandoned by her clan for being weak. She has no loyalty to them because they showed her none. When I found her, she was dying in a blizzard, crying and alone. I could not leave her to freeze. I brought her home, and my family welcomed her. In the month since, she has done nothing but try to be helpful and kind. She is a child, just a child, and she deserves the same chance at life that any human child would receive. Let me see her, someone called from the back. Let us see this orc child up close. Callum looked down at Grukka. She was terrified. He could see it in every line of her small body. But she nodded and stepped forward. The crowd parted as she walked through them, her head held high despite her fear. When she reached the center, she turned slowly, letting everyone see her, her green skin, her small tusks, her pointed ears, her size, which even after months of good feeding was smaller than most human children her age. She is just a baby, someone murmured. "Look how small she is." "Those are the saddest eyes I ever seen on a child." An older woman, grandmother to half the children in the settlement, pushed forward. She knelt in front of Grukka and looked her over carefully. "Child, do you know your numbers?" "Yes, madam, I can count to 100, and I am learning to add and subtract." "Can you read a little?" "I am still learning. It is hard, but Joanna is teaching me." "Do you help the Quinn family with their work?" "I try to. I gather eggs and help with cooking, and I am learning to tend the animals. Callum is teaching me to carve wood and to know which plants are good and which are poison." The grandmother smiled. "You sound like a very useful member of the household. Tell me, child, if you could have anything in the world, what would you want?" Grukka thought about this carefully. "I would want to stay with Callum and his family. They are kind to me. They make me feel safe. I want to help them and learn from them and maybe, someday, make them proud of me." The grandmother stood and turned to face the crowd. "This is not a monster. This is a child who wants what every child wants: a home, safety, love. I say she stays with the Quinns. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Then another voice spoke up, and another, each one declaring support for the Quinns. Not everyone agreed. There were still those who muttered about the danger and the impropriety of humans and orcs mixing. But the majority was clearly in favor of letting Grukka stay. Marcus's face had grown darker and darker as the meeting progressed. Finally, he stood. "This is not a democracy. The garrison has final authority on security matters, and I say that orc is a threat and must be removed." "Then you will have to remove her by force," Callum said quietly. "And if you try, you will have to go through me, and through everyone here who supports us." "You would fight garrison soldiers. That is treason." "No, that is protecting an innocent child from an abuse of power." Callum looked around the room at the faces of his neighbors, his community. "We are frontier people. We survive out here because we look after each other, because we stand together against threats. If the garrison becomes a threat to one of our children, then we stand against the garrison." The silence that followed was profound. Marcus looked around, clearly taking the measure of the room, and what he saw made him stiffen. These were hard people, frontier people, and they were united in a way he had not anticipated. Finally, Thomas the merchant spoke. "Sergeant Quinn, I think you should take this matter to your superiors at the regional command. Let them make the final decision. In the meantime, I think it would be best if you and your men return to the garrison and let things settle down." It was a diplomatic way of telling Marcus to back off, and everyone in the room knew it. Marcus looked like he wanted to argue, but he was smart enough to recognize when he was beaten. He nodded curtly. "Fine. I will report this to my commander, but this is not over." "Perhaps not," Thomas agreed. "But for now, the matter is closed." The soldiers left, and the crowd began to disperse. But before people left, many of them stopped to speak to Callum and Grukka, to offer words of support, to touch Grukka's shoulder or hair as if confirming she was real. The old grandmother hugged her and told her to be good and study hard. By the time they made it back to the homestead, Grukka was exhausted but smiling. "They liked me," she said wonderingly. "Those people, they stood up for me. They did. Because you showed them who you really are, not an orc. Not an enemy, just Grukka, a good child who deserves to be safe and happy." That night, after everyone else had gone to sleep, Callum sat by the fire, thinking about everything that had happened. The confrontation with Marcus was not truly over, he knew that. But they had won a battle today, and that was something. He heard soft footsteps and looked up to see Grukka approaching. She climbed up onto the bench beside him, snuggling against his side in the way she had taken to doing. "Callum, are you worried?" "A little, but we will be all right. We have friends now, we are not alone." I am sorry I caused so much trouble. You do not cause trouble. Marcus causes trouble. You just exist, Grukka, and you have every right to exist here with us for as long as you want. She was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. Then, in a very small voice, she said, I love you. You and your family, I love you all so much it makes my chest hurt sometimes. Callum felt emotion rise in his throat. He wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. We love you too, all of us. You are ours now and we are yours. That is what family means. She nodded against his side, and they sat together in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn down to embers. The weeks that followed were tense. Word came that Marcus had indeed reported the situation to his superiors, and that an officer from the regional garrison was coming to investigate. But the frontier was vast and travel was slow, and weeks turned into a month, then 2, and still no officer appeared. Meanwhile, spring arrived in full, transforming the landscape. Snow melted, revealing brown earth that soon showed hints of green. Callum began the spring planting, working long days in the fields. Grukka was always there, following him around, asking questions, helping where she could. Why do you plant the seeds in rows? She asked, watching him work. Because it makes them easier to tend and harvest, and it helps the plants get enough sun and water without competing too much with each other. Can I try? He showed her how, and she took to it quickly. Her small hands were nimble, and she worked with a focus that many adult workers lacked. By the end of the day, she had planted 3 full rows under his supervision. You did well, he told her as they walked back to the house, both of them dirty and tired. In a few months, we will harvest the vegetables you helped plant. You should be proud of that. I am. I like working with you, Callum. It makes me feel useful, like I have a purpose. You do have a purpose, many purposes. You help on the homestead. You make my sisters laugh. You keep my mother company in the kitchen. And you. He paused, trying to find the right words for what he wanted to say. You make me believe that maybe the world can be better than it is, that humans and orcs do not have to be enemies. That is a very important purpose. She smiled up at him, her tusks gleaming in the evening light. Do you really think we can show people that orcs and humans can be friends? I think we already are showing them. Every day that you live here with us, that you work and play and laugh like any other child, you prove that the differences between us are not as important as we have been told. It will take time for people to accept that. Some might never accept it. But others will see the truth, just like the people at the meeting did. I hope so. I want to help make things better, for both humans and orcs. Then you will. I believe that. Summer came, hot and bright. The crops grew tall and Grukka grew too. She was still small for her age, but she was healthier now, stronger. The haunted look that had been in her eyes when Callum first found her was long gone, replaced by a confidence and happiness that warmed his heart. It was in midsummer that the officer from the regional garrison finally arrived. Captain Edward Brennan was a career soldier, older than Marcus, with gray in his hair and a face lined by years of frontier service. He came with an escort of soldiers, but his manner was far less antagonistic than Marcus's had been. Callum met him in the yard, braced for trouble. But the captain simply dismounted and offered his hand. Callum Quinn, I am Captain Brennan. I am here to investigate the situation regarding the orc child in your care. Grukka. Her name is Grukka. Grukka, then. May I see her? Clara came out with Grukka, who looked nervous but stood straight. The captain studied her for a long moment, then knelt down to her level, much as the grandmother had done at the meeting. Hello, Grukka. My name is Edward. I need to ask you some questions. Is that all right? Yes, sir. How old are you? 8, I think. Maybe 9 now. I am not sure when my birthday is. And how did you come to be here with this family? Grukka glanced at Callum, who nodded encouragement. Then she told her story, about being abandoned by her clan, about the storm, about Callum finding her crying and choosing to save her. She spoke clearly and honestly, and the captain listened without interruption. When she finished, he nodded slowly. That must have been very frightening. You were very brave. Callum was brave. He risked his life to find me. Then he brought me home, and his family kept me even though they knew people would not like it. And do you like it here? I love it here. This is my home. These are my people. She pointed to Callum and Clara. They are my family now. The captain stood and turned to Callum. May we speak privately? They walked a short distance away, out of earshot. The captain looked back at Grukka, then at Callum. That child adores you, and you clearly care for her. I do. She is part of my family. Sergeant Quinn filed a report claiming the child is a security threat. That her presence here represents a dangerous precedent, but I see no threat. I see a child who has been given a second chance at life. He sighed. The frontier breeds hard men like Marcus, men who see enemies everywhere and trust no one outside their own kind. I understand it. I have been fighting orc raids for 20 years, but I have also seen enough to know that not all orcs are the same, just as not all humans are the same. So you will not force us to send her away. No. I will report that the child poses no security threat and that she should be allowed to remain in your custody. However, he paused. You need to understand that this decision will not be popular in all quarters. Some will see it as weakness. Others will see it as betrayal. You may face continued harassment. We can handle it, as long as the garrison officially leaves us alone. You have my word on that. Marcus will not be happy, but he will follow orders. The captain offered his hand again. You are doing a good thing here, Quinn. Not many would have the courage. I hope it works out for you. They shook hands and the captain remounted. Before he rode away, he paused and looked back at Grukka, who was watching with wide eyes. Take care of them, young one. They are good people. The frontier needs more people like them. I will, Grukka promised. I will take care of them forever. The captain smiled and rode away with his escort. The official decision from the garrison came in writing 2 weeks later. Grukka was formally recognized as a ward of the Quinn family and was to be left unmolested by garrison forces unless she personally engaged in criminal activity. It was a bureaucratic way of saying she could stay, and the relief that washed through the household was palpable. Marcus, however, was not pleased. He avoided the Quinn homestead after that, but the few times Callum saw him in town, the sergeant's expression was dark with resentment. Callum knew he had made an enemy, but he could not bring himself to regret it. The years began to pass. Grukka grew from a child into a young woman, though she remained small by orc standards. She was quick and clever, with a mind that grasped new concepts rapidly. Callum taught her everything he knew about farming, animal husbandry, woodcraft, and survival. Clara taught her cooking, sewing, and the 1,000 small skills needed to run a household. His sisters taught her reading, writing, and arithmetic. But beyond the practical skills, she learned something more important: how to live with hope instead of fear, how to give trust and receive love, how to be part of a community. The neighborhood children, who had initially been frightened of her, grew up alongside her and came to accept her as just another part of the community. She played with them, helped them, and in time, they forgot to think of her as different. As Grukka matured, Callum found his feelings toward her beginning to shift in ways he had not anticipated. She was still the child he had saved, still his responsibility and his family. But she was also becoming something more. He found himself noticing things about her he had not noticed before. The way she laughed, bright and uninhibited. The way she moved with a grace that belied her strength. The way she looked at him sometimes with an expression he could not quite read but that made his heart beat faster, it was confusing and somewhat frightening. She was an orc. He was human. Society might have grudgingly accepted her presence in his household, but anything more than that would be beyond scandalous. And yet, he could not deny what he was beginning to feel. The realization came fully one autumn evening when Grukka was 15. They were in the barn together, settling the animals for the night. She was laughing at something, her head thrown back, her tusks gleaming in the lamplight, and Callum felt it hit him like a physical blow. He loved her, not as a guardian loved a ward, not as a brother loved a sister, but as a man loved a woman. The intensity of the feeling staggered him, and he must have made some sound because she turned to look at him, concern crossing her face. "Callum, are you all right? You look strange." "I am fine, just tired." It was a lie, but he could not tell her the truth. Could he? No, it would be inappropriate. She was too young, he was supposed to be her protector, and the whole situation was impossible anyway. But his heart did not care about appropriate or possible. His heart only knew that he loved her and that the feeling was growing stronger every day. He tried to hide it, to go on as before, but it became harder and harder as time went on. Especially because, as Grukka grew older, she began to exhibit signs that perhaps her feelings were changing too. The way she would sometimes watch him when she thought he was not looking. The way she found excuses to stand close to him, to touch his arm or shoulder in passing. The way she blushed sometimes when their eyes met. It all came to a head one spring evening when Grukka was 17. They were walking back from checking the far fields, the work done for the day. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Grukka had been quiet all day, and Callum had learned over the years that her silences usually meant she was working through something in her mind. "Callum," she said finally, "can I ask you something? Always. Do you ever think about the future, about what will happen to me when I am grown?" The question caught him off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I am not really your sister. I am not really part of your family by blood. Eventually, I will need to make my own way in the world. I have been thinking about that a lot lately, about what my life will be like. You do not need to worry about that. You have a place with us for as long as you want it. But I cannot stay forever. That would not be fair to you or your mother or your sisters. You all have your own lives to live. I cannot be a burden on you forever. You are not a burden, you never have been." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "Grukka, where is this coming from?" She looked away, her jaw tight. "I heard some women talking in town last week. They were saying that it was strange that you never courted anyone, that you are almost 30 now and should have a wife and children. And they said it was because of me, because taking care of an orc has ruined your reputation and no decent woman would have you now." Anger flared in Callum's chest. Those women have no idea what they are talking about. But they are right, are they not? You should have a wife. You should have a family of your own. And as long as I am here taking up your time and attention, you cannot have that. Tears were forming in her eyes now, glistening in the fading light. "I do not want to be the reason you end up alone, Callum. You deserve to be happy." "I am happy. Right here, right now, with you. I do not need anything else. But Grukka, listen to me. I have not courted anyone because I have not wanted to, not because of your reputation or anything like that. I have not wanted to because—" He paused, the words sticking in his throat, but she deserved the truth. They both deserved it. "Because I love you," she froze, her golden eyes wide. "What?" "I love you, not as a guardian or a brother. I am in love with you, Grukka. I have been for years now. And I know it is inappropriate and probably wrong, and society will certainly think it is insane, but it is the truth. I love you." For a long moment, she just stared at him. Then softly she said, "I love you too." Now it was Callum's turn to be stunned. You do? Yes. I have loved you since that first night in the storm when you could have left me to die but did not, when you held me and kept me warm and promised you would not leave. I have loved you every day since then, and as I grew older that love changed into something different, something more. She stepped closer, her face tilted up toward his. I love you, Callum Quinn, with everything I am. He should have been rational. Should have considered all the complications, all the ways this could go wrong. But in that moment, with her standing before him, her face open and honest and full of love, he could not think of any of that. He could only think of how long he had wanted this, how much he loved her, how right it felt to finally say it out loud. Callum reached out and cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears on her cheeks. Then he leaned down and kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, as if they were both afraid the other might pull away. But when neither did, when Grukka's hands came up to clutch his shirt and pull him closer, the kiss deepened. It was sweet and passionate and perfect, everything a first kiss should be. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Grukka smiled, and it was the most beautiful thing Callum had ever seen. So what do we do now? She asked. Now we figure out how to make this work, because I am not giving you up, Grukka, not now, not ever. If you will have me, I want you as my partner, my wife, if you will agree to that. Your wife? She looked stunned, then delighted. You want to marry me, more than anything. But only if that is what you want. I will not pressure you. We can take time. We can. She kissed him again, cutting off his words. When she pulled back, she was grinning. Yes, I want to marry you. I want to spend my whole life with you. I want to build a future together here on this land, in this place that gave me a home when I had none. They stood there, holding each other as the sun set and the first stars appeared. Callum felt a contentment settle over him that he had not felt in years. This was right. This was how things were meant to be. Of course, not everyone agreed with that assessment. When they returned to the homestead and announced their intentions, Clara's reaction was complicated. She was happy for them, that much was clear, but she was also worried. People will not accept this, she said bluntly. An orc and a human marrying, that has never been done, not in this region. Maybe not anywhere. You will face hatred and prejudice worse than anything you have dealt with so far. We know, Callum said, but we love each other, Mother, and we are both adults who can make our own choices. I know you are, and I see how you look at each other. I am not blind. She smiled, sad and proud at once. Your father would have approved, I think. He always said that love was the most important thing, more important than tradition or prejudice or fear. If you two love each other, truly love each other, then I support you. But you must be prepared for difficulties. We will face them together, Grukka said, taking Callum's hand. We have faced everything else together. This will be no different. His sisters were more enthusiastically supportive. Marilla, now married herself with a child on the way, thought it was romantic. Joanna, who had always been closest to Grukka, was simply delighted that her beloved friend would be officially joining the family. The rest of the community was less united. When word spread that Callum and Grukka intended to marry, reactions ranged from mild support to outright hostility. Some people thought it was sweet, a storybook ending to an unusual story. Others thought it was an abomination, a violation of natural law and social order. The most vocal opposition came, unsurprisingly, from Marcus. The sergeant had never forgiven the Quinns for defying him, and this new development gave him fresh ammunition. It is illegal, he proclaimed loudly at a town meeting called specifically to address the situation. There are laws against this sort of thing. Laws about appropriate relations between species. Actually, there are not, Thomas the merchant countered. He had done research, had consulted law books from the regional capital. There are no laws prohibiting marriage between humans and orcs because no one ever thought to write such laws. It has never come up before. Then we will write a new law. Right now, we will make it illegal, and that will be the end of it. You cannot write a law to prevent a specific marriage, Thomas replied patiently. That is not how law works. And besides, who are we to tell two adults who they can and cannot love? What harm are they doing? They are mixing species. It is unnatural, is it? They seem quite natural to me, quite happy in fact, happier than most married couples I know. Thomas looked around the gathered crowd. I say we let them marry. It is their choice, and it affects no one but them. The debate raged for hours, but in the end, the community was too divided to reach a consensus. There were no laws to forbid the marriage, but there was also no one officially willing to perform the ceremony. The local minister refused, saying it went against his religious beliefs. The garrison chaplain would not even consider it. It seemed they had reached an impasse. Until the old grandmother who had first spoken up for Grukka years before stood and silenced the room with her presence. I will do it, she announced. I am authorized to perform handfastings and bindings by the old frontier traditions. If the law will not recognize them and the church will not bless them, then we will do it the old way. A binding under the open sky, witnessed by the community, sealed by oath and action. It will be just as valid as any church ceremony, maybe more so. The old woman's word carried weight, and her offer settled the matter. A date was set for midsummer, a month away, and preparations began. That month was a whirlwind. Clara threw herself into preparing for the ceremony with the same practical efficiency she brought to everything. A dress was made for Grukka, simple but beautiful, in a shade of blue that complemented her green skin. Callum had a new shirt and vest made, proper formal wear for such an occasion. Food was prepared, decorations were planned, and invitations were sent to all the homesteads in the region. Grukka was a bundle of nervous excitement. What if no one comes? She worried one evening. What if everyone boycotts it to show their disapproval? Then we will have a small ceremony with just family, Callum reassured her. But I think people will come, curiosity if nothing else. He was right. When the day arrived, bright and clear and perfect, over 100 people gathered in the field behind the Quinn homestead. Not everyone was there to celebrate, some came just to witness the spectacle, but they came. The ceremony site had been decorated with wildflowers and ribbons. Chairs were set up for guests, and a simple arch had been constructed at the front. The old grandmother stood beneath the arch, dressed in her finest clothes, looking ancient and wise and somehow magical. As the sun reached its highest point, music began to play. Marilla's husband had brought his fiddle, and he struck up a traditional wedding march. The guests rose and turned to watch as the procession began. Joanna went first, scattering flower petals. Then came Clara, walking with dignity and pride. And finally, Grukka appeared, walking alone as was the frontier tradition, showing that she came to this union of her own free will and choice. She looked stunning. The blue dress hugged her figure, and someone had woven flowers into her dark hair. Her tusks had been polished until they gleamed. Her golden eyes were bright with emotion, fixed on Callum where he stood waiting beneath the arch. Callum felt his breath catch as she approached. She was beautiful. She was everything. And in a few minutes, she would be his wife. Grukka reached the arch and took her place beside him. The grandmother waited for the music to end, then spoke in a voice that carried across the field. We are gathered here under the open sky and in the presence of community to witness the binding of Callum Quinn and Grukka. This is an unusual union, yes, perhaps unprecedented. But the heart knows no boundaries of species or tradition. The heart simply knows love. She turned to Callum. Callum Quinn, do you come here of your own free will to bind yourself to this woman? I do. And do you promise to stand beside her, to support her, to defend her, to love her through all the days of your life, in prosperity and hardship, in joy and sorrow, until death parts you? I do so promise. The grandmother turned to Grukka. Grukka, do you come here of your own free will to bind yourself to this man? I do. Her voice was clear and strong. And do you promise to stand beside him, to support him, to defend him, to love him through all the days of your life, in prosperity and hardship, in joy and sorrow, until death parts you? I do so promise. Then by the old laws and the new, by the traditions of this frontier and the bonds of your own hearts, I declare you bound. Seal your binding with the kiss of commitment. Callum turned to Grukka, took her hands in his, and leaned down to kiss her. She kissed him back, and the crowd erupted in applause. Not everyone clapped. Marcus and his supporters stood silent and stone-faced, but enough people celebrated that it filled the air with sound. When they broke apart, both were smiling. They were married. Despite everything, despite all the obstacles and prejudices and complications, they were married. The celebration that followed was boisterous and joyful. Tables had been set up with food and drink, and music played late into the evening. People danced, including Callum and Grukka, who spun around the field together while guests cheered. As the sun set and the party wound down, Callum and Grukka finally had a moment alone. They stood at the edge of the field, watching the stars appear, her head resting on his shoulder. "We did it," she said softly. "We are married, we are together, forever." "Forever," he agreed, wrapping his arms around her. "No matter what comes next, we face it together." "Together," she echoed and turned her face up to kiss him again. The next years proved the truth of those words. Life on the frontier was never easy, and their unusual marriage added complications. But they faced everything as a team, supporting each other through hard times and celebrating together during good ones. Marcus continued to be a thorn in their side, though his ability to cause real trouble was limited after the official blessing of their union by the community. He made complaints and filed reports, but nothing came of them. Eventually, he was reassigned to another garrison post, and they were finally free of his harassment. Other challenges arose. Crop failures one year, a particularly harsh winter the next. An illness that swept through the community and claimed several lives, though thankfully none from the Quinn family. Through it all, Callum and Grukka worked side by side, their bond growing stronger with each shared trial. In the third year of their marriage, Grukka became pregnant. It was unexpected. No one had been sure if a human and an orc could have children together. But the proof was soon undeniable, and 9 months later, Grukka gave birth to a healthy baby boy. He was beautiful, with his mother's green-tinged skin, though lighter than hers, and his father's human features. His ears were slightly pointed but not as pronounced as his mother's. He had no tusks, at least not that were visible yet. He was, in every way, a perfect blend of both his parents. They named him Connor, and he became the joy of the entire household. Clara doted on her first grandchild. Marilla and Joanna visited constantly, bringing their own children to play with their unique little cousin. And Callum and Grukka themselves were besotted, spending hours just watching him sleep or laugh or discover the world. The news of Connor's birth spread through the region, and reactions were mixed. Some saw him as proof that humans and orcs could coexist peacefully. Others saw him as an abomination. But most people, upon actually seeing the baby, found it hard to maintain their prejudices. He was just a child, after all, innocent and helpless, deserving of love like any child. More babies followed. 2 years after Connor came a daughter, Ilara, who had her mother's golden eyes and her father's brown hair. Then another son, Marcus, named in deliberate irony for the man who had tried so hard to tear their family apart. Each child was unique, each a beautiful blend of their heritage, and each loved beyond measure. The Quinn homestead became known throughout the region as a place where old hatreds did not rule, where different peoples could live together in peace. Other interspecies couples began to appear, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence as they saw that it was possible. The world was changing, slowly but surely, and the Quinns were at the forefront of that change. One evening, many years after that first winter storm, Callum and Grukka sat on the porch of their expanded house, watching the sun set over the fields they had worked together for so long. Their children were inside, Connor now grown and helping with the farm, Alara learning to read to her younger siblings, baby Marcus sleeping peacefully in his grandmother's arms. "You ever regret it?" Grukka asked, her head resting on Callum's shoulder in the comfortable intimacy of long marriage. "Following that crying through the whiteout, saving me instead of just finding shelter for yourself." Callum was quiet for a moment, considering. Then he smiled. "Not for a single moment. That storm brought me the greatest gift of my life. It brought me you. I was so scared that night. I thought I was going to die alone in the cold, and then you appeared like something from a story. You saved my life, Callum, and you saved mine. Maybe not from freezing, but from a life half-lived. You taught me that love is stronger than fear, that connection is stronger than division, that family is what you make it, not what you are born into." He kissed the top of her head. "You made me whole, Grukka. You and our children and the life we have built together. I would walk through 1,000 storms to find you again." She tilted her face up to kiss him, and he obliged, their lips meeting in the gentle affection of long-married partners who still loved each other as fiercely as they had on their wedding day. Inside, they heard laughter as Connor said something that made his siblings giggle. The sound drifted out into the evening air, mixing with the sounds of the farm settling down for the night. "We did something important, did we not?" Grukka said. "Not just for us, but for others. We showed them it was possible. We did. And our children will show them even more. They will grow up knowing both human and orc ways, belonging to both communities and to neither, and they will bridge the gaps that divide people. They are the future, Grukka. A better future than either of us could have imagined alone. A future we made together." "Together," he agreed. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, one by one, in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, and closer by, an owl hooted. The frontier was still a wild place, still dangerous in many ways, but it was also beautiful and full of possibility. Callum thought back to that desperate trudge through the blizzard, to the sound of crying that had pulled him off his path toward shelter, and toward a destiny he never could have predicted. He had followed that crying through the whiteout, and the lost orc girl had grabbed his coat and had not let go, and he was so very grateful that she had held on tight, because in saving her, he had saved himself. In giving her a home, he had found his true home. In loving her, he had learned what love truly meant. The world was changing, slowly becoming a place where children like Connor and Alara and Marcus could grow up without the old hatreds and divisions. It would not happen overnight. There would be setbacks and struggles and resistance. But the foundation had been laid, and it was strong because it was built on love. Grukka squeezed his hand, and he squeezed back, a silent conversation of affection that needed no words. Inside, Clara began singing a lullaby to baby Marcus, her voice soft and melodic. The other children joined in, their harmonies slightly off-key but enthusiastic. This was happiness, Callum thought. This was what a life well lived looked like. Not perfect, not without challenges, but full of love and purpose and family. He had everything he needed right here in this place with these people. The future stretched out before them, uncertain but bright with possibility. Whatever came, they would face it together, the human man and the orc woman and the children who embodied the best of both peoples. They were a family forged in a storm, tempered by adversity and made strong by love. And as the last light faded from the western sky and the stars blazed overhead in their infinite beauty, Callum Quinn smiled and held his wife close and felt nothing but gratitude for the storm that had brought them together and the crying that had led him to her. They had found each other against all odds, and they had built something beautiful and lasting and true. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Not the prejudices they had faced or the obstacles they had overcome, but the simple, profound truth that they loved each other, that they had chosen each other, and that their choice had made the world a better place. Together, always together, they would face whatever came next. And together, they would continue to show everyone that love transcends boundaries, that family is chosen as much as given, and that the most unlikely connections can become the strongest bonds. The night deepened around them, peaceful and perfect, and they sat together in contentment, grateful for the storm that had changed their lives and the love that had saved them both.